Hey everybody, thanks for coming back and watching my videos. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. Today we're going to do a video about weights for flipping, pitching, basically punching mats, the type of gear you need, the line, the rod, the whole get. And then also on top of that, we're going to do a segment on the differences between flipping and going to a smaller weight and really getting into tight cover with a lighter line and a lighter rod and pulling them fish out of there. All right, so let's get right into it. So for me, I live in Central Florida. Flipping weight is going to be, like I said, punching mats, hydrilla, anything like that. It's going to be anything over a 3/4 ounce weight. So this can go from a 3/4 all the way up to 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces. This is a tungsten weight. Now, when you're flipping, you want to use a bobber stopper. And sometimes you're going to need two of them. What this does is this will sit right on top of the weight, like so, real close. And if you're using a heavy weight, you will need two. What that does is it prevents this heavy weight from sliding up and down your line when you're trying to punch that mat, because you want a compact bait, compact deal to get through here. So you have your bait on this end, flipping weight here, and then one or two bobber stoppers on the other side. And that keeps everything tight together, so when you flip it up into that mat, it's going to punch right through it. So like I said, 3/4 or higher is going to be your flipping weight style. For me, when it comes to flipping, I use tungsten. And the reason I use tungsten is because it's smaller. On average, I'm lucky enough I have some tungsten smaller stuff now because I found it on sale. But on average, when you throw in a big bait, a creature bait or anything you want to flip with, you don't want this massive profile. Because what will happen, especially in the weight, is when you go to set the hook, that big amount of lead, because lead's bigger than tungsten, that big amount of lead will actually, when you go to set the hook, you're pulling that weight. When their fish is closed, it's going to pull the weight out and it's going to open their mouth. And it has a tendency to pull straight out because your hook and your weight and everything's so tight together, you're going to pull it and it's going to come straight out. So you're actually going to miss some fish. That is actually one of the reasons why I prefer a extra wide gap hook. This is a VMC flipping hook that they make. It's an extra wide gap. So what makes this hook different from this hook? Okay, same size, right? But the difference is, I don't know if you can tell from this, is the diameter. You can't see it from here. This hook is much thicker. It's a heavier gauge than this hook. This hook has some bend to it. So this is the lighter wire gauge. I can take this and see how I can bend that? That's a lighter wire flipping hook. I'm sorry, extra wide gap hook. This is the flipping hook. It's thicker. So when I go to set the hook, I can't bend it. It's extremely stiff. My personal preference is I will use an extra wide gap with a bigger weight when I'm going into ounce and a half, because when you have such a big weight, like I said, it's going to pull that open. But when a fish bites down and you go to pull that weight, so if the mouth of the fish is here and you have the weight and everything in his mouth and you go to pull it, you're going to pull down. It's going to open a little bit, but you have the chance that his top lip is going to fall in this crevice right here. Whereas a straight shank, you don't really have that. It's just kind of straight. It's exactly what it says. It's a straight. So there's no big indent for that lip to fall in. So that's why I use an extra wide gap hook. Now for me, I'm going to use it on 65 to 80 pound braid. You're talking heavy line, heavy gear, heavy rod, and the realist personal preference. We'll get into that as well. Braid is extremely important when you're flipping in heavy mats. It has a tendency to cut through the grass much easier than fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon will have a tendency to kind of fight you on the way out, whereas braid will literally like cut through it. It'll cut that grass because it's essentially a small rope. So think of it as when you go to grab a moving rope, it's rope burn. Same concept, but in grass. It'll cut it relatively quickly, and that will help you get that bait in and out much faster and much smoother. I tie a double polymer, not a polymer, a double polymer when it comes to braid. It's stronger in braid. It is not a good knot for fluorocarbon or monofilament, in my opinion. Monofilament has a tendency to stretch, and it becomes a weak point. Braid, there is no stretch. It's constant. It's a direct line tied to your bait. So like I said, 65 to 80 pound braid. You can use the brand of your choice. I had to trial and error some braid until I found the one I like, and I landed on Yozuri braid, which is actually the same thing I use for my fluorocarbon as Yozuri as well. Rods. I don't have my flip and stick with me, or I would show you. But for me, I'm gonna use. I like a rod with a little extra bend to it. So when I move that bait in there, I can feel it go down, and then my rod tip will just slightly bend. Some people prefer what they call a broomstick. It is stiff. It does not move until you have a big fish on the other end. I prefer to have that little extra feel, so I'll use a heavy, fast action. I'm currently using a 7.4, and it's a loose speed stick right now. And I like it. I'm a short guy, so I don't want an 8-foot rod or a 7-11 or. Now don't get me wrong, a 7-11 will give you that extra leverage to get that fish out of there in that heavy grass. But for me, 7.4 is perfect. If you're a smaller guy, it just works out, in my opinion. On the other spectrum of that, when we're talking lighter gear, 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce, 1/2 ounce even, you don't need super thick gear. I mean, everybody grew up throwing a worm when they started out fishing, and you weren't throwing it on 65, 80 pound braid or 25 pound fluorocarbon or 20 pound fluorocarbon. None of that was around. Now the younger anglers, if you want to use it, you have at it. If it gives you that extra confidence when you set that hook, you know it's not going to go anywhere, go for it. But for me, I'm going to use probably 16 to 18 pound fluorocarbon. That's what I like to use personally. And I'm always going to peg a weight. I'm always going to peg it. So just like it was when you're flipping, same thing. You're going to have the hook is going to be here. Just like that. It doesn't have to be that tight, obviously, but relatively close. And then you're going to have your bobber stopper here on the top. Just like that. That keeps that package together, whether you're swimming a worm, whether you're pitching a worm around, or you're fishing a Cinco, or you're fishing a creature bait, a beaver bait, anything that you would like to keep together. And the reason I will say that is because imagine this as a limb, okay? If you're fishing over this limb and your whole package is put together, it's going to come over the limb together. Now, if you don't have a bobber stopper on it, what's going to happen is your bait is going to come over first. You're going to feel your bait hit the bottom. So that can make you think it's a bite because it's going to be a sudden thump, or your bait is going to come over. You're not going to think it's a bite, and you're going to reel in. And when you reel in, if even a little bit of your hook is exposed, you're going to get hung on that limb probably about 85% of the time. For me, I just feel it's an easier preference. It's an easier way for me to fish. I can get in and out of cover faster if I want to fish fast that day. But I also have no doubt that when I get that thump, it's a fish. Reel down, set the hook. Hook sets are free. So I'm going to do letter line, letter tackle. Depending on the depth zone that you're fishing, on average, I usually fish a 1/2 ounce weight. That's pretty much standard across the board, especially in my jigs. I'll use a 1/2 ounce weight. And I'll usually fish on a medium heavy rod. Because you're using this lighter equipment, this hook that has flex in it, you don't want to hit them so hard that you want to rip their face off. Because what will happen is this hook will bend out if you have a big fish. Either that or your line will break. If you have an extra stout rod and that rod doesn't bend and you have lighter line and lighter wire gauge hooks, it's going to either bend that hook out or it's going to break your line. You want it to have some type of give because you don't have the strength in your equipment, in your line, and your hook, so that you want that rod to give. Now, if you had, say, if you were fishing this and 20-pound fluorocarbon and a heavy, hit them. Don't worry about it. You should be fine. And then also for me, like I said, I use a medium heavy fast action and it's a 7.3. You don't need a super long rod to do what I'm describing. Between 7 and a 7.4 is relatively average. If you're target fishing, you want to go to a shorter rod. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'll reply as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you.